Good morning and welcome back to the Higher Grounds podcast. Thank you for joining us today. Today, around the table, we'll be having Pastor Steve Williamson from Lexington, South Carolina, pastor of the Gethsemane Baptist Church, and Chad Watson in Hartsville, South Carolina, who pastors the Gloryland Baptist Church, as well as Brother Poindexter and myself. Today, we're going to be talking about our involvement with the We Stand With God pro-family rallies from 2015. It was after the Supreme Court's decision in June of that year on the subject of same-sex marriage that these men got together and started what was called the We Stand With God rallies. And we want to reminisce back on that and talk among ourselves about what God was doing in our life and what God has done through that. And so we want you to be here today for this episode. It'll be a great episode. And so you stay tuned over the next 30 minutes. We'll have a good time together. God bless. Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Higher Grounds podcast. Thank you for joining us today. This is a special edition of the podcast. I have some dear friends with me that have been friends with us for a long, long time, as well as Brother Poindexter being with us.
Oh, well, I got kicked out of the friend circle. On the outer edges now. I'm in the cities of refuge. Well, welcome back in.
As you say, everyone has their cross to bear.
Here's my friends and Brother Poindexter. Well, these are still my friends. These two guys here, and Brother Andy's still my friend too. I'm going to stick biblically here on this thing.
Well, you know, they're all the time messing with me about messing with you, and I don't even try. And sometimes
it just happens,
it
brother.
Just happens. It's natural.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, Mike.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I've been called worse and said harsher things to me.
And you will before the day's over.
I probably will. Yeah. It's okay.
Well, it is good to have a couple of guests with us. Of course, Brother Chad Watson, he's been on here before with the Pastors Mighty Men Conference. That was several weeks back that we had him on here on the podcast. And then Brother Steve Williamson. Well, it's good to have you on.
Yes, sir. Wonderful to be here.
And
absolutely.
You pastor. Tell our people where you pastor.
Gethsemane Baptist Church in Lexington, South Carolina.
You've been there a long time.
Been there a long time. The only church I know got saved there when I was 15. Went to the mission field at 21. Come back after about 4.5 years. Was associate pastor for 4.5 years. And then took the church over, and I've been the pastor going on 16 years now.
Hallelujah. Man, that is great.
Church I've ever known.
And you were on the mission field for a while.
4.5 years.
4.5 years. And you were a pilot, and you did some aviation missions.
Flew all over Haiti, Dominican Republic, evangelized about 30 or 40 of the Bahama Islands, the Virgin Islands, Barbados, Trinidad, all that area. We just kind of had evangelical ministry.
Amen. Now, you've been back pastoring Gethsemane since what year again?
Oh, my God. Well, I've been there now 20, as associate pastor and the pastor, 22 years.
Okay.
So all right. Going on 23 years from the mission.
All right. Then, so in the late 90s is when you came back.
I came back.
That's great. And you just entered into a new phase of life, didn't you?
I sure did, with my oldest son getting married.
Your oldest son got married and
gained a daughter.
Well, you did, and hopefully you're going to gain some
grandchildren. Yeah, they're telling me 3 years.
Is that what they're telling you?
Yeah, they're holding out. So I just told them there's a word like oops, you know.
Yeah. Well, prayer can do a lot.
Can do a lot.
Amen. Well, I'm going to tell you, the grandbaby thing is it's going to change your life, man. It'll change your life. Well, today we are drinking some coffee. And it's pretty good coffee, isn't it?
It is good. Very good.
This comes from the Honduras Coffee Company. This is an Italian roast coffee. It's a dark roast coffee. And as most of you know, as we have tried to educate you before, darker roast coffee has less caffeine in it than light roast coffee does. And the longer you cook the beans, the more caffeine gets cooked out of it. But this was sent to us by Brother Stacy Piercy.
Good friend.
He found this coffee and he said, "I don't drink coffee," and he brought it to the
man who will drink it.
To a man who will drink it. And so he brought it up to the counter, and the guy says, "Would you like for us to grind that for you?" He said, "Oh, it's got to be ground." He had no idea, that it was beans and it had to be ground, and so they ground it and sent it to us. And we want to say thank you to Brother Stacy.
Yes, absolutely.
You talking about a great singer.
Yeah.
He's a preacher and a singer, plays and writes songs, has written some very good songs.
Yes.
I'm Not Going to Hell is one of the songs that he's written. I believe that's right. And for some of the preachers that we have talked about on our podcast, they thought it meant I'm not going to jail, but they wound up in jail anyway. And so they got the song wrong. But he's a great singer, not much of a preacher, but he's a great singer.
Poor guy.
And so if you want a good man for a good week, call Brother Stacy Piercy, and he'll be glad to come by and preach a little bit and sing a little.
That's not the sentiment of the whole podcast, Brother Stacy. That's just sentiment of Brother Andy. The rest of us think you're a fine preacher. Yes,
you are. You're a fine preacher. Yes, you are. I want to give a quote today. This quote comes from Edmund Burke, and an Irish statesman. And Edmund Burke made this statement. He said, "Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing, because all he could do was just a little." In other words, he is saying, if you can only do a little, do what you can, and don't sit down on your stool of do nothing and do nothing if all you can do is a little bit. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. June 2015, I was at Wingate University and was finishing up a camp there. And I got word on that Thursday or Friday, I can't remember which day it was. I believe it was Friday morning. We got word that the Supreme Court of the United States of America had made a decision on same-sex marriage. As a result of that, my heart was extremely grieved over that decision that was made by the Supreme Court. And my wife and I, the week after youth camp, had gone down to Beaufort, South Carolina, just to kind of stay for a day or two and take some rest and relaxation. I was extremely burdened and full of care the entire week. That next Monday, I believe it was, Brother Watson called me, and I'll let him kind of pick the story up from there. You called me about what can we do about this. You remember that phone call?
Yes, sir. Brother Andy, I remember just after the ruling came down from the Supreme Court, just being so, I don't know a time in my life I've been that heavily burdened. Grieved, burdened. And I was in prayer that morning that I called you, and the Holy Spirit made it very clear that He wanted us to do something. I didn't know what to do, but I told the Lord, I said, Lord, whatever it costs, whatever it takes, I do not want my children and my grandchildren down the road to ask me, what did we do?
Yes.
What did the church do?
Sure.
Daddy, you were a preacher. What did you do when the Supreme Court ruled? I remember I got up from prayer and I walked to the restroom. I was standing in front of the mirror and put my hands on the sink, and I just couldn't even get myself together, just weeping uncontrollably. And I remember looking in the mirror, my eyes bloodshot with tears, and I said, Lord, by your grace, we're going to do something.
Yes.
If you would direct our steps, we're going to do something. And I called you, and at the time didn't really know exactly how we were going to do it, any of the details, but I knew God made it clear to me that He wanted us to take a public stand about this decision that the Supreme Court had made. And we wanted to make it very clear that as born-again believers, as pastors, and as churches in the state of South Carolina, that we would not acknowledge or recognize or obey this new law that was shoved down our throats by the Supreme Court.
Right.
And so when I called you, Brother Andy, that's when I was in the early stages of God really developing this thing into my mind. I talked with Brother Williamson, and he actually helped fine-tune this thing about taking it to the state capitol.
Yes, sir.
And God just began to develop it from there.
Well, what happened was when we called one another and the three of us got together, we met at, I think, an IHOP restaurant in Columbia,
correct.
South
Yes.
Carolina.
Yes, sir.
Remember
Yes,
that
sir.
meeting?
Oh, yes, sir.
And we sat down and we just began to, we don't know what we're doing. Let's just just toss ideas back and forth, and we began to. And Brother Steve said, "Well, why don't we go to the state capitol?" He had been involved in some things at the state capitol in the past. Kind of pick it up from there, Brother Steve.
Well, when Brother Chad called me, I just sat in our prayer room. When that ruling came down, I literally felt like the weight of the world had crushed me in my spirit.
Yes, sir.
And I was the same way when Brother Chad called. I told him, it's amazing how God will take men that he has burdened and connect them
Right.
at the moment.
Right.
I mean, it's a providential hand of God. It is the moving
Yes,
of the
Amen.
Spirit of God.
Amen.
And I sat in the prayer room because our church has always been very active in the open platform, street preaching. We've gone to jail. We fought Supreme Court, federal court, won it. I mean, our church has always kind of been frontline
Yes,
church
sir.
out there.
Right.
Anytime the sodomite parades have marched in the street of Columbia, we've been there. I mean,
Right.
holding signs and preaching. I mean,
And not being belligerent.
not
I
belligerent.
remember that.
No, yeah, not belligerent at all. Just say it. Somebody's got to take a stand.
Right.
Yes, sir.
And so I sat in our prayer room and I began to break and weep. I mean, I'm about to weep thinking about it at the moment. And I told our men, I said, we have to do something.
Yes, sir.
I said, we are going to do something. I don't know, but I said, I don't care if we have to get a parade and march through the streets of Columbia and try to get every church that we can so that we can. I was thinking a parade to start off with in my mind.
Right.
And that's when you called me, I said, well, maybe we can have a break. So I'm already thinking. And when Brother Chad called me, it was a confirmation of the burden that we have to do something. And then he told me that he had talked to you, and we said, well, let's get together and talk.
Yes.
And that's really how it burnt. Thank God that Brother Chad called me.
Right.
How the Lord nudged him, because I'm thinking, I don't know what to do either, Lord. We have to do something.
Yes,
and I'm telling you, the great blessing that God prods men
Yes.
to make a phone call and to do something. If you said the small things, just as much as making a couple phone calls, what happened?
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yeah, because we can't do it ourselves.
No
trying to
way.
figure out what to do, and
No
God
way.
begins to lead men. Brother Chad to call you, Brother Chad to call me, and the burden all on our heart, and put it all together at the same time.
From that meeting, what happened next was Brother Williamson made a call. He made a call about getting a permit for using the South Carolina State Capitol building as a venue for a rally. And you found the process to be hard, or was it
At first,
difficult?
when I first called, I called about a parade. And we went the parade avenue first, trying to parade. But the amount of streets they were going to have to shut down was absolutely not going to be feasible with the crowd that I was telling them. Hopefully, by faith, they asked me how many. I said 10,000. I mean, we didn't know.
We didn't know.
That's right.
didn't know
We
whether
had no
there'd be
idea.
25. But man, we were thinking big, just
Yes, sir.
trusting the Lord from the start. And they just said, it's probably not feasible. And I said, well, can we get the Capitol grounds? But if we do, we're going to have to shut down Assembly Street. Can we go into Main Street? Because how many can assemble on the Capitol ground? And
Right.
that's kind of where it started. And I just started, I didn't even know who to call, who to get a hold of, what the process was. And it's not as hard now. It wouldn't be as hard as it was then, trying to figure the process
Right,
out. It'd be
right.
pretty simple now, but it was kind of like going through the woods with no trail.
That's
trying
right.
to find your way. is
In the
what it was
dark
like.
with no
In the dark,
flashlight.
Exactly. That's what it
Kinda
felt
how it
like.
was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when we got done with that meeting, we felt like we're for sure going to do something. We don't know how this is going to happen. But we're going to do something, even if
Exactly.
it's the three of us standing there with signs in our hand
Exactly.
at the Capitol building. So on our way home, I was driving, and Chad and I can remember exactly where we were at on I-20, and your phone rang.
Yes, sir.
And when Chad's phone rang, it was a man who has become a dear friend of ours, Chad Conley, who at the time was the Faith Engagement Director for the RNC, working out of Washington, D.C. under Wright's Priebus. He had been the former chairman of the GOP party in the state of South Carolina, and he's a devout Christian. And Chad Conley called Chad Watson. Tell about that conversation.
Well, I didn't know who Brother Conley was at the time, and we were riding down the interstate. I got a phone call, and he said, "My name's Chad Conley," and he told me who he was. He worked with the Faith Engagement Department of the GOP, and somehow I can't remember all the details, but he'd gotten my phone number, my name, and he heard that there were some pastors getting together that were wanting to take a stand.
Now let me interject here. This is within 30 minutes.
It's pretty amazing.
This is within 30 minutes of
Really?
us leaving the restaurant. And
God.
as far as we know, we're the only three people talking to one another. I have no idea how he found
And
it.
he called and he said, I just want you to know, brother, you guys are on target. He said, what you men are doing is what I have been begging pastors to do, because he said they're in a state of slumber. He said just for some pastors to awake out of sleep and call the church out of a state of sleep and slumber to step to the front line and for such a time as this. And we began to talk, and of course, Brother Conley became a very vital part of us beginning to put together this rally that took place.
He put us in charge pretty much immediately with his right-hand man, who was Drew McKissick at the time, who's the current chairman of the GOP party in the state of South Carolina, who also is a Christian. And he basically sent him to kind of sit down with us, make sure that we weren't wackos, I'm
Kind
sure.
of fill the situation out before he wasted his time to meet with us.
Exactly. And then, I stuck my foot in my mouth while I was there, and his eyes got
Like
real
you
big,
often do.
like I often do.
Amen.
And he wasn't sure what he had, right? So anyway, that God knit our hearts with Drew.
And that
Yes,
meeting,
sir.
because us three met with Drew.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
At the restaurant that
And
day.
then it was on.
It was on.
We secured a date, which was the what was the date on that? 28th of it was the 28th of August, if I remember correctly. I believe that's right. And
Good
when
for
we
you.
when we secured that date, Brother Steve began to work on logistics.
Oh, so
talk about
much
the logistics of
logistics.
what we had to get.
Well, security, because they're asking me how many people, because they cannot just approve without knowing there's enough security and whether there's going to be enough room. So we had to hire, I believe we had, if I'm correct, I think it was 15 extra off-duty police officers plus Capitol security. And I had to meet with security 3 different times. I mean, I'm talking about all of security at the Capitol. Went in and had to meet with them, tell them what we were doing. We had to secure permits for because when we have that many people, we realize we have to have porta-johns, we have to have bathrooms.
Right.
And so, we had, I can't remember.
Had to have barriers.
Barriers, metal barriers. We had to have our own security team we
sir.
put together from all of our churches. We had to have, I think we put 25 porta-johns out there.
Right.
Getting that secured to put them there.
Parking.
We had all the parking. It was routes for buses to come in and drop off.
Yes,
and
sir.
Places for buses to park once they
And we
have
didn't know
dropped
if
off.
anybody was coming.
No, and then have shuttles set up to shuttle people from certain areas
Right.
back to there, and then get the bus drivers from there back to the Capitol.
And we didn't know how many people were coming.
we had no idea, none whatsoever.
Sound.
And then just the sound system through Gaddis Pro Audio, having to have enough sound to reach everybody, and the sound was awesome.
It was awesome.
It was awesome. $15,000 awesome.
And we didn't know how
For
many
one
people
day.
were coming.
$15,000 by
With
faith.
Screens by faith.
We
No
had
money.
No
We had
money.
no money, none whatsoever. By faith, we're just gonna do it. And we got the projected bill of $14,800 something for the sound, and we're like,
Do it.
Well, God, do it. That's it.
That's right.
Really. I mean,
right.
that in itself is huge.
Yes,
And then
sir.
you've got $3,000 for porta johns for
Right.
one day, or $3,500 for porta johns
Yes,
one day,
sir.
and then $4,000 in off-duty police officers
Security.
for one day.
Right.
Security.
Right. And because
it's
this,
a lot of money.
because this was such a volatile issue, or at least they thought it would be, and they didn't know what kind of whack jobs we might happen to be, there was literally snipers that were laying on top of
Yes, sir.
buildings in downtown Columbia to
Yes,
cover the event. And, this was just a peaceful gathering of Christians,
Exactly.
Yes.
And they were very astounded at how we put it together and how we left it cleaner
Clean.
than when we got there.
Yes.
They were just absolutely amazed. Well, once all this is set in place, Brother Steve begins to work on the logistical end. Now, the promotional end lies in the lap of Brother Chad and myself. Tell about that whirlwind tour.
We had 7 weeks between the time we committed to one another and to the Lord we were going to do it to the day of the rally. 7 weeks. And for the next 7 weeks of our lives, me and Brother Andy pretty much lived on the road. We were home for church service,
right?
And that was about it. We lived on the road. We crisscrossed the Carolinas. We were meeting with groups of pastors and meeting in churches, meeting in restaurants with preachers and with Christians for the next 7 weeks.
Right.
We rarely saw our families or anybody outside of one another, and just trying to get the word out. We secured billboards across the state of South Carolina. I can't remember how many billboards we had.
Awesome, too.
And we had call-in teams. We got churches involved in making call-in teams. The Lord put us in contact with Brother Poindexter, and he was really a vital part of helping us,
Yes, sir.
especially
Absolutely.
develop and organize as far as getting some organization was concerned. And so God really began to put things together. But it was amazing where the Lord took us in that seven weeks. I remember being in Anderson, South Carolina, at a race. On the infield with the car drivers, with all the race car drivers.
We're talking about a NASCAR sanctioned track.
NASCAR sanctioned track. We were standing there, and they said, "We want you to talk to these drivers." And so we were able to promote this rally and talk to them about this upcoming event, have prayer with them there in the infield, and then they took Brother Andy out on the finish line, on the main straightaway there, and had him to promote the rally and pray with all the folks in the grandstands, all the folks that were there. Just amazing. I'm amazed. I remember I still got pictures on my phone from us sleeping in coffee shops, sitting there where Brother Andy's falling asleep. We survived on very little sleep for the next 7 weeks.
That's exactly right. We burned the candle at four ends. I mean, for 7 solid weeks. And in the meantime, that last week, my family vacation, which was already planned prior to that, was coming up. And being family men as we were, I went on vacation with my family. But while I was on vacation, I was on the phone every day with news outlets calling and
Yes, sir.
doing. We were doing interviews with,
on all these radio stations.
Yeah, with Fox and several folks, throughout the U.S.
Yes, sir.
And Christian radio stations.
But the bottom line was this was a foreordained, providential moving of God, because we literally
That's all it is.
are 3 guys from nowhere who no one knows. And we pastor, small churches by the standard of the megachurch. But I think one of the reasons why God used the 3 of us to do what we were able to do is because we didn't want any credit for it.
Right.
We could care less whether you knew our name or our face. We just wanted to do something for the Lord. And I think God honored that. I really
Absolutely.
did. I really did.
Well, that's why he put his touch on it, because at the end of it, he got all the glory.
He did.
I'm telling you, when the front page of the state newspaper, with that banner, "We Stand With God,"
Yes, sir.
and they put on there over 10,000 gathered at the state
On the front
capitol.
page of the state
On the
paper.
front
That's
page
right.
of the state paper.
There was over 12,000 people really that had
closer to
gathered
the
there that day.
14,000. We had aerial photography done.
Yes.
And
Yes.
trying to count everybody just from that so we can get and there's so many people who are all inside the trees embedded you couldn't see.
couldn't even tell.
I believe it was closer to 14, 15,000.
Could have been
12.
Well, we had a media stage set up, and we had people that were appointed to do interviews for the rally itself with the media. But we even had pro-homosexual media like The Advocate that came in to the media stage and even covered the rally themselves. And they didn't have anything negative to say about our stand. They spun it to where it was about Christian liberty instead of standing against the Supreme Court's decision.
Yes, sir.
But I'm telling you, it's just phenomenal, what we were able to see God do in that amount of time.
We were told it was the largest crowd in the history of the state of South Carolina to ever assemble on the state capitol grounds.
And to this date, it's been the largest
the
crowd
largest
ever.
crowd ever.
We had a 600-seat choir
Right.
on the front steps of the state capitol. One of the presidential one of the men that were running for president of the United States, Rick Perry's campaign manager, told us, of course, he helped with the inauguration service for Nikki Haley, and he said up until our rally, that choir for her inauguration was the largest choir to ever assemble on the steps, and our choir was over twice the size of that choir.
Close to 3 times, because I think
Three
their
times,
choir
200.
was
Less than 200.
We
right,
had
600.
This is an amazing story. I want to stop the podcast here, and I want to go on with another episode.
let's do
if you
it.
can sit on, because we're going out of South Carolina into various states, and it's still going on today. Yeah. And so we want you to stay tuned next week to the Higher Grounds podcast for part 2 of the We Stand With God rallies.
Amen.